Hello, everyone. Welcome to our CARE community briefing on the 2023 Hate Crime Report. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kat New, and I'm the Director of the Office of Community Awareness, Response, and Engagement here at the California Department of Justice. Combating hate crimes and ensuring public safety remains a priority for Attorney General Bonta. We know that hate crimes are often underreported and that this hate crime report may not capture the full scope of what our communities are facing. However, we hope that this data is helpful for you in your work to address hate crimes. As faith leaders, community leaders, and elected leaders, your efforts to educate others helps to make our community safe. Along with me today are other members of our CARE team who will share more about today's presentation. Deputy Director Maheen Ahmed, State Manager Benjamin Nate, Special Projects Coordinator Anthony Ammons, Outreach Managers Tong Tao, Efrain Boteo Cisneros, Laura Tinajero, and Sarah Farouk.
Over the past 3 years, we have heard from community partners who are looking for hate crime data, but are not aware that the California DOJ compiles hate crime data from law enforcement agencies in California. In response, we designed this webinar for you.
This briefing originally began as a series of smaller, regional, virtual meetings and has grown to a statewide webinar in order to develop knowledge and awareness of the report and provide a comprehensive understanding of hate crimes with more people.
During today's presentation, you will hear from experts within the California Department of Justice. First, you will hear from Allison Luneta, Program Manager for the California Department of Justice Statistics Center. She will provide a presentation on the most recent hate crime report.
She will be followed by Michael Redding and Damon Brown, Special Assistant Attorneys General, to share about the role of the California DOJ when it comes to hate crimes. To round out the DOJ presentations, Britton Lacey, DOJ's Hate Crime Coordinator, will share information about her responsibilities.
And we are also pleased to welcome Becky Monroe and Chantel Bermudez from the Civil Rights Department to share information on resources available through the California versus Hate program.
There will be an opportunity to ask questions of our panelists. Please submit your questions through the question and answer box that may be found toward the bottom of your Zoom window. If you are a member of the media, please disclose your media outlet in your question.
This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our CARE webpage at oag.ca.gov/care, along with the materials that are shared during this event. With that, please welcome Allison Luneta, Program Manager for the California DOJ Criminal Justice Statistics Center.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am the Program Manager for the Criminal Justice Statistics Center, and we are the program within the department that collects and maintains and reports out on the hate crime data coming in from law enforcement agencies throughout the state. In our presentation today, we're going to go over what a hate crime is, how that hate crime is reported, what law enforcement's responsibility is in hate crime reporting, what DOJ's responsibility is, what hate crimes are reported and what are the hate crime caveats, what is not part of hate crime reporting, what the 2023 statistics look like, and we're also going to go over our Open Justice website to help you navigate so that you can locate this information for yourself. First, let's start by going over what a hate crime is. Penal Code Section 422.55 defines a hate crime as a criminal act that is motivated in whole or in part because of one or more of the following actual or perceived characteristics of the victim: a disability, race or ethnicity, gender, religion, nationality, sexual orientation, or an association with a person or group with one or more of these perceived characteristics. In order for a hate crime to be reported to the Department of Justice, it must reach two elements. First, there must be a criminal act or an attempted criminal act. Some examples of those crimes are murder, rape, robbery, intimidation, destruction, larceny, theft, and human trafficking. There must also be a second component, a bias motivation against one of the protected characteristics previously mentioned. The definition of a bias is a preformed or existing negative opinion or attitude towards a particular person, group, or entity based on that particular protected characteristic. An attitude is a hatred, animosity, resentment, contempt, revulsion, unreasonable fear, paranoia, callousness, thrill-seeking, a desire for social dominance, or a desire for social bonding with those of one's own kind. Under California Penal Code Section 13023, the Department of Justice is mandated to collect hate crime statistics and any relevant information regarding those hate crimes. We are also mandated to publish that information that is obtained. There's a Federal Congressional Hate Crime Statistics Act as well. Public Law 101-275 mandates the FBI to collect hate crime information, and the FBI is mandated to publish that in their annual summary as well. Let's go over some of law enforcement's responsibilities in hate crime reporting. It is law enforcement's job to investigate and identify hate crimes that are reported to them. They are responsible after investigation for reporting those hate crimes monthly to the Department of Justice, and to work with our DOJ analysts to resolve any discrepancies or answer any questions we may have on that submission. Within law enforcement's responsibilities, each agency implements a two-tier decision-making process. On the first level, it's typically the law enforcement officer who initially responds to the hate crime incident, or the responding officer, or what we call the first level judgment officer. Their responsibility is to determine whether there's any indication that an offender was motivated by bias. If they do determine there's a bias indicator, the officer then designates that particular incident as a suspected bias-motivated crime, and then they forward that case on. The second level, we have a second level judgment officer is an individual who is specifically trained in hate crime matters. Their responsibility is to review the facts of the incident and make that final determination of whether a hate crime has actually occurred. When they are looking at hate crimes that are reported, they're looking for the crime and the bias to ensure that there's a hate crime. Some of the things they're looking at in determining the bias is whether or not the offender's comments, gestures, written statements reflect a bias, which can include graffiti or other symbols. Any differences between the victim and the offender, and whether or not that is actual or perceived by the offender. It's important to remember here that to be a victim of a hate crime, you do not need to possess the actual characteristics of the bias motivation of the offender. The perceptions of the victim and other witnesses to the crime. Additional things law enforcement should consider is whether or not the victim was engaged in activities promoting his or her group or community, whether or not the incident coincided with a holiday or a date of particular significance, whether or not the incident involved organized hate groups or any of their members. They also need to take a look and see if there's any similar incidents in the same location or neighborhood to identify possible patterns. In the absence of any other motive, such as economic gain, and there's a need for a case-by-case evaluation. Not all hate crimes are the same, and it's important to take each case individually and look at everything that happened in that specific case. An offender's mistaken perception does not negate the fact that there was a hate crime. Now let's talk about DOJ's responsibilities. We collect the data, which means we work with the law enforcement agencies throughout California to collect and review that hate crime data on a monthly basis. We compile and submit that crime data to the FBI, and then we publish the annual report in the hate crime in California. Some of our other responsibilities in regards to collecting the data is reviewing those incoming submissions for accuracy and completeness. We make sure that the data that's coming in meets the standards for the data collection set by the FBI. We ensure the data integrity of the hate crime submissions through quality control checks. We also look for and identify anomalies and resolve those with agencies. We work with the agencies to provide review and feedback. We ask follow-up questions, and we assist in any review and submissions. We also provide training. We go over the responsibilities of the law enforcement officers, the reporting timeframes when those need to be reported to DOJ. And we also go over the hate crime identification and determination and the things that they should be looking for. A large part of the training is scenario-based training based off of actual crimes that have happened within the state. Finally, we compile and publish the data in our annual report. We also have the information downloadable on Open Justice. We have contextual documents that describe the data collection, its requirements, and also the format of the file. And in some cases, the Attorney General does produce special reports. Here's one important hate crime caveat to think about when we're looking at the data. The information that's reported to us and the data posted on Open Justice is a compilation of the hate crime events reported to law enforcement and then reported to us. If the reports are not being made to law enforcement to investigate, they are not able to investigate and they are not able to send them to the department. The information DOJ publishes may look different than the data published by other entities. It's important to keep this in mind when looking at the numbers produced by other entities, as the DOJ numbers only reflect what the public has reported to law enforcement. If these reports to law enforcement are not happening, there's no way to account for them in our reports. Let's talk for a moment about the items that do not qualify for hate crime reporting. Acts of discrimination, hate incidents, which may have protected hate speech, but do not rise to the level of an actual crime. And let's go over the hate crime statistics for 2023. This is the cover of the 2023 hate crime publication that is available on the AG's website and also through the Open Justice website. The number of reported hate crime fluctuates from year to year and over time. There are some years that have high numbers and some years that have low numbers. It is important to note in this year that there were several agencies that had technological difficulties in reporting to us due to the change in the transition from summary reporting to incident-based reporting. Please take a look at the hate crime report in the publications Understanding the Data section on page 5 for a listing of these agencies. Here's a recap of the reported crimes for 2023. Over the last 10 years, reported hate crime events have increased by 159.9%. The lowest year for reported hate crime events was 2014 with 758. The reported hate crime events have decreased 7.1% from 2120 and 2022 to 1970 and 2023. Reported hate crime offenses have also decreased 8.9% from 2589 in 2022 to 2359 in 2023. The number of victims of reported hate crimes decreased 6.9% from 2474 in 2022 to 2303 in 2023. The number of suspects of reported hate crimes also decreased 9.2% from 2031 in 2022 to 1844 in 2023. Now let's talk a moment about an event versus an offense. The term event is defined as an occurrence where a hate crime is involved. This means the totality of the incident. The information about an event crime or source that meets the criteria for a hate crime. There may be one or more suspects involved, one or more victims targeted, and one or more offenses involved for each event. This is why the count of events is smaller or can be smaller than the offense events, the offense counts. The term offense is defined as a criminal act that are recorded as followed: murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, larceny, theft, motor vehicle theft, arson, simple assault, fondling, intimidation, and destruction, vandalism, false pretenses, and weapons violations, as defined by the Uniform Crime Reporting through the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the National Hate Crime Statistics Report. In terms of racial bias events from 2023, the reported events involving a racial bias overall decreased 21.6% from 1298 in 2022 to 1017 in 2023. The anti-Black or African-American bias events fell from 652 in 2022 to 518 in 2023, representing a decrease of 20.6%. However, anti-Black or African-American is still the largest bias type represented in all reported hate crimes. Anti-Hispanic or Latino events fell from 210 in 2022 to 199 in 2023, a decrease of 5.2%. Anti-Asian bias events fell from 140 in 2022 to 125 in 2023, a decrease of 10.7%. This slide represents the racial bias trends from 2014 to 2023, and I'll just pause for a moment so you can take a look. Now let's move on to the religious bias events. Reported hate crime events involving a religion bias increased 30% this year, from 303 in 2022 to 394 in 2023. Anti-Jewish bias events rose from 189 in 2022 to 289 in 2023, an increase of 52.9%. Anti-Islamic Muslim bias events also rose from 25 in 2022 to 40 in 2023. And anti-Protestant bias events fell from 12 in 2022 to 1 in 2023. Here's the trend table depicting the anti-religion bias trends over the last 10 years. Now let's talk about the sexual orientation bias events. Reported hate crime events involving a sexual orientation bias increased 3.6% from 303 in 2021 to 303 in 2022 to 391 in 2023. The anti-gay male bias event fell from 271 in 2022 to 231 in 2023, a decrease of 14.8%. The anti-LGBTQ plus bias event rose from 81 in 2022 and to 151 in 2023, an increase of 86.4%. And this category was relabeled from a previous label in our hate crime, but it still captures the same type of data. This is the trend table for the sexual orientation bias over the last 10 years. Now let's talk a little bit about gender bias events. In 2023, the gender bias events decreased from 84 to 82. The anti-transgender bias events rose from 59 in 2022 to 65 in 2023. And the anti-gender non-conforming events fell from 12 in 2022 to 11 in 2023. And here's the trend table over the last 10 years for the gender bias. Let's take a look for a moment about the reported offenses. Those decreased 8.9% from 2589 in 2022 to 2359 in 2023. Violent crime offenses decreased 17.5% from 1790 to 1477. Property crime offenses increased 4.3% from 759 to 792. The next slide shows the trend table over the violent crimes of the last 10 years. And this slide shows the trend tables for the property crimes over the last 10 years. This is a breakdown of the counts of the reported hate crimes by region. These are the counties displayed in the Central Coast. And here are the counts for the Inland Empire. LA Orange County area. The Sacramento Central Valley. Northern California. In the Bay Area. Let's talk a moment about Open Justice. This is our transparency website available to the public, where we post downloadable files, interactive tables, and also all of the publications. You can also download all of the README or contextual documents that provide the governing statutes for each of the collections, the data limitations, the data dictionaries for each of the data sets. You can access all of our annual reports, and you can also access data from other programs from within the department. This is the link for Open Justice. And when you go to this link, you'll see 3 different tabs that you can click on. The data exploration, which has the interactive tables, the data portal, which has all of the downloadable files, and the resources page, which contains the publications. Let's take a look at data exploration. When you click on data exploration, you can select from one of the crime types that you are interested in. If you select that type, you can always do the README first. That'll give you a good context behind the data collection that you're looking at. And then you can select for all counties or a specific county. You can select a year range or a specific year. You can select whether or not you want to look at crimes, clearances, or clearance rates, and then click on Enter. The search will display the criteria for which you presented, either a single year or multiple years for a particular agency or county. In the data portal, we have all of the data listed individually and alphabetically for you. You click on the README document and you'll get a summary of the information and how it is presented. And then if you click on the summary links, that will actually download the file for you in CSV format. This is what the resource publication page looks like. And you can navigate to publications, and then you can select what particular publication you are searching for. In closing, it's important to understand what qualifies as a hate crime and the complex process an event goes through in the identification process. Law enforcement has specific responsibilities to identify and report hate crimes to the Department of Justice, and the DOJ has specific responsibilities to ensure the quality of the data received and to publish this data. Law enforcement and DOJ can only report out what is received in. Thank you. And I will now turn it over to Michael Redding and Damon Brown.
Thank you, Allison. I want to start by reaffirming the Attorney General's commitment to combat hate and why this is such an important function and role of the Department of Justice. If you can move to the next slide. The California Department of Justice has a zero tolerance policy when it comes to hate and will continue to work with law enforcement, elected leaders, and community organizations like many of the ones that you all are a part of here today across the state in order to keep our communities safe through education, prevention, and enforcement. And I think that this quote here certainly embodies that commitment. Next slide. The Racial Justice Bureau is a bureau within our Civil Rights Enforcement section and is tasked with the civil enforcement of hate crimes and the statutes that have been passed by the legislature in order to fight and combat hate. And here is just a brief summary of the purpose of the Racial Justice Bureau, which was created by Attorney General Bonta in 2021 to stand against racial injustice in all of its forms and to ensure that we are working with local elected leaders, stakeholders, in order to strengthen our capacity to take on a wide range of issues and to make sure that the work that we're doing throughout the department sees its work through the lens of social and racial justice. Next slide. Some of the efforts that we have engaged in through the Racial Justice Bureau are listed over the next couple of slides, the first of which does address hate crimes and combating hate organizations within the state to ensure that all Californians are safe and protected from ideologies or sentiments that promote hate. We also focus on implicit and explicit bias in policing to make sure that local communities are truly protected by those who are sworn to protect and to serve. Next slide. And also that as we are engaging with local law enforcement, we are a resource to them in order to make sure that they are engaging in best practices for constitutional policing throughout. We also focus on campus climate issues, including making sure that there are no discriminatory policies being promoted within K through 12 and community college and college education. As well as other ways to strengthen communities on campus to ensure a diverse and safe environment. And most notably, the Racial Justice Bureau provided support to the Reparations Task Force that submitted its report to the legislature last year to address some of the inequities that exist following chattel slavery here in the United States. Next slide. So the Ralph Civil Rights Act is the civil law that was enacted by the legislature in order to address the problem of racial, ethnic, religious, and minority violence by providing civil and administrative remedies for those who are victims of violence and intimidation by threats of violence that are directed against any particular class of individuals. And the list that you see here on this slide shows the categories of persons who are protected under the Ralph Act. Anyone here in the state has the right to be free from violence and the threat of violence based on any perceived or actual membership in any of these categories. Typically for a claim to be actionable under the Ralph Act, it requires some sort of physical contact or threat of physical contact with a person or their property. And some of these examples could be vandalism, graffiti that references a group belonging in one of these categories, any attempts to discourage or stop religious activities or threats of violence because of the exercise of religious activities, brandishing a weapon, that's used to threaten someone because of their perceived membership in any of these categories, and certainly any assault because of their membership in these groups. Next slide. The phrase "because of" means a couple of things depending on the context. In order to have an actionable claim under the Ralph Act, the action must be taken because of their membership in those protected classes. And the threshold for this crime is different for criminal law than it is in civil. In criminal, that bias motivation must be a substantial factor in the reasons that the actions are taken. In civil, it's a little more murky. Some courts will view it based on the criminal standard. Others will apply a lesser standard, which just requires that there be a motivating factor and not necessarily one that rises to the level of being substantial. Next slide. Private lawsuits can be filed for hate crimes under the Ralph Act. And any Californian can sue someone who interferes with their right that's secured by federal or state law. And these are the various remedies that would be available to a person if they were to successfully bring a claim for hate crimes. Under injunctive relief, an example of that could be a restraining order against the individual committing the crime. Actual damages could be costs that would cover any harm suffered as a result of the action for any medical treatment, lost wages, property repairs, etc. And then the others that are available, other equitable relief, punitive damages for the wrongdoing, and civil penalties are also available for a successful litigant in private lawsuits that can be recovered by either the individual or the Attorney General on behalf of individuals that may be aggrieved under this statute. There are also attorney's fees available for bringing such claims to vindicate any harm that's been suffered as a result. If you're a victim, again, you can file a private lawsuit in the appropriate court, or you can file a claim with our office or the Civil Rights Department, which is going to be presenting some information here today. And you can exercise your rights under the Ralph Act through that means. State law also does provide for the establishment by local cities and counties of human relations commissions that help to preserve the peace amongst citizens of varying religions, ethnicities, and national origins. And so you should also contact your local community, your city, county, to see if such a commission exists in your area. Next slide. I'm going to now turn it over to Michael Redding to talk a little bit about differentiating between hate crimes and hate incidents.
Great. Thank you, Damon. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that the California Department of Justice is doing in this space. A couple things to note. One, so for hate crimes, these are predominantly investigated and prosecuted at the local level by local law enforcement agencies and by local district attorneys' offices. Two, I did want to note, and Allison talked a little bit about this. I won't go through all the different types of hate crimes as she covered that, but I did want to reiterate, really that there is, a distinction between a hate crime and a hate incident. Just because something does not rise to the level of a hate crime does not mean that it's that it's not an ugly incident, or that it's not something that should not happen. Nevertheless, the hate crime standard, is high and does indicate that there's been some specific penal code violation. So that list that Allison went through are the ones that are listed here. So hate crime is a crime against a person, a group, or property motivated by the person's actual belonging to a social group or perceived belonging to a social group, meaning that this person who committed the crime perceived that person to belong to the group, whether or not that's true, and then committed one of these crimes. It can be a criminal threat, It can be an assault. It can be a wide variety of things. A hate incident, again, may be ugly, name calling, insults, displaying hate material on your own private property. But those don't rise to the level of a hate crime in the California Penal Code or the federal statute. Next slide, please. So with that, I just want to talk very briefly about first the Department of Justice's role in the fight against hate, and then the Attorney General's role. So as we've gone through, we the Department of Justice, engage in data collection. We reported out through Open Justice, the California Incident-Based Reporting System, and then put out this hate crimes report. But as Damon mentioned, this has also been a key priority for Attorney General Bonta. Next slide, please. And to that end, the AG has really been focusing on a number of different areas. One, sort of first and foremost is connecting with the community and making sure that he understands the world that we're in, and he understands the experience that people are having up and down the state. So he's had various roundtables, and we've met with a wide variety of different leaders. He's also been engaging, taking some of that information and both bringing local prosecutors and local law enforcement agencies to those events to make sure that everybody is getting that input that he's receiving, but also working with those groups to make sure that they have the resources that they need, that they have the knowledge that they need. Like I said, these crimes are mostly investigated and prosecuted at the local level, but our role and the role that I think the Attorney General sees here is really to make sure, first that everybody has the knowledge and information to prosecute these cases, that they know that it's a priority, and to make sure that the law is being enforced, across the state. So to that end, we've been working a lot with local law enforcement agencies and hate crimes prosecutors. He's also been providing resources for victims and hate crimes brochures, and obviously trying to do that in a variety of languages to make sure that reaches out to everybody who needs to hear it. And then finally, he's appointed a hate crimes coordinator here at the California Department of Justice. So now I'll turn it over to that hate crimes coordinator, Britton Lacey.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Britton Lacey. I am a Deputy Attorney General in the Criminal Law Division, Appeals, Writs, and Trials section, and I am also DOJ's statewide hate crime coordinator. So what does that mean? I'm going to tell you a little bit about my role and responsibilities. My primary role is that I'm the point person for DOJ colleagues and external partners regarding the prosecution of and response to hate crimes. So within DOJ, I work with our Civil Rights Enforcement section and Division of Law Enforcement, issuing guidance and bulletins that Damon and Michael just discussed. I work with our Office of Legislative Affairs when it comes to proposed and pending legislation related to hate crimes, and our Office of Community Awareness, Response, and Engagement, ensuring that DOJ is aware of and responding to community members' concerns. Outside of DOJ, I communicate and collaborate with hate crime prosecutors, law enforcement agencies, and community organizations throughout the state, convening those groups and establishing and fostering connections between them, offering DOJ's assistance in hate crime investigations and prosecutions as much as possible. And then lastly, I also work to further DOJ's efforts to combat hate by participating in specific committees and projects. So although I'm based in San Diego, I'm part of anti-hate working groups up and down the state that bring together criminal prosecutors, law enforcement agencies from sheriff's departments, police departments, the FBI, and community organizations. I've participated in and presented at hate crime summits in Los Angeles and San Francisco. And I'm currently part of a team that's revising the California District Attorneys Association Hate Crimes Manual, and also helping to provide a comprehensive hate crimes training in 2025. The goal of both the manual and the training is to aid prosecutor offices and law enforcement agencies throughout the state and enhance hate crime investigations and prosecutions in California. I'll share with you my contact information, which will also be available with these slides that are going to be available on the CARE website, so no need to memorize it. Thank you for being here today, and now I'll turn it back over to Kat.
Thank you so much, Britton. It is now my pleasure to invite our friends from the California Civil Rights Department to present. Please welcome Becky Monroe, Deputy Director of Strategic Initiatives and External Affairs, and Chantel Bermudez, California versus Hate Senior Manager, to share resources about the California versus Hate program. Welcome.
Thank you, Kat. And we are going to turn directly to a presentation we have for you. I wanted to just first thank our colleagues at the Attorney General's office. One of the things that we take pride in, I think, in California is that we are approaching hate from a very comprehensive perspective, and that means strong partnerships with colleagues at the AG's office, as well as you'll hear a little bit more about our work with the California Department of Social Services, the State Library, and other agencies to make sure that there is no wrong door if someone is targeted for hate. So with that, I'm going to jump in and share a little bit of information about what we do here at the Civil Rights Department with respect to combating hate. And I want to start by answering a question that I just saw in the chat about sort of how the work that we do, which again, you can report to us. I'm going to give you more specific information. You can report to us by going to cavshate.org or stophate.calcivilrights.ca.gov. So I'm going to give you a very clear explanation of sort of how our information and information shared with us is different than the information that you would see in the report from the Attorney General's office. We are not connected to law enforcement in the same way. We do collect information and we share that information, but our information comes directly from people who are targeted for hate or organizations who may represent them. So I'm going to give you a little bit more context on that, but I just wanted to make sure, because I saw that question and I wanted to make sure you have additional information about that. So the Civil Rights Department in California, we are the agency that protects people with respect to civil rights with civil rights enforcement, which means we do not enforce criminal civil rights protections, but we do enforce civil rights protections. So that means discrimination in employment, housing, public accommodations, as well as, and you heard a little bit earlier about the Ralph Act. So we can also enforce civil protections under the Ralph Act for to protect people from hate violence. We also have civil protections that we can enforce with respect to human trafficking. When we think about sort of our comprehensive approach to combating hate, we recognize, and this is something that I think is important and that my colleagues in the AG's office did an excellent job of making that distinction between hate crimes and hate incidents, other forms of civil rights violations. At the Civil Rights Department, we recognize that when we are talking about acts of hate incidents, or hate crimes, they don't happen in a vacuum. They happen when we do not have effective enforcement of civil rights across the board. So that's why at the Civil Rights Department, when we have our approach to combating hate necessarily includes addressing other forms of discrimination. So at the Civil Rights Department, we have California versus Hate, the resource line and network that I'm going to share information about where people can report and get support. We have the Commission on the State of Hate. We are the staff for that commission. The commission is an independent commission that is appointed by the governor as well as the legislature. And we also have the Community Conflict Resolution Unit, which does work, again, outside the context of courts, but to make sure that communities are at the center of addressing issues around discrimination and hate. We also have invested strongly in partnerships across agencies, including with the Attorney General's office, the California Department of Social Services, and their Stop the Hate grant program, as well as the State Library and their work with ethnic media grantees. So I share that just to recognize, and I saw some of the questions in the chat, it is important to know that we all have different jurisdiction and the different ability to respond to different acts of hate and also forms of discrimination that may lead to acts of hate. And we recognize to do this effectively, we have to be in partnership across the state. So I'm going to give a little bit of information about the California versus Hate hotline, which again, to one of the questions before, if you go to cavshate.org, or you can go to our website through Cal Civil Rights in order to get information about how to report. So one of the things that's really important to distinguish what we do, and it is again different than what the AG's office does, is that people can report all forms of hate, whether it is an act of hate that is a crime, an incident, or another form of discrimination. Now, one of the things I want to note is that if someone comes to us we give them their options. So the first thing we really want to do is if someone is targeted for an act of hate, we want to help them identify options and next steps. One question may come, I think I may have been targeted for a crime. I'm not sure what would happen. What are my next steps? We have often had people come to us and ask for information, and then we can help them if they want to go to law enforcement, help explain what that process looks like. Other people may not feel safe or comfortable going to law enforcement. I saw that question reflected as well earlier. And that's okay. You are not required to go to law enforcement if you come to us. Some people just want to identify it when we report an act of hate. And then secondly, connect with culturally competent resources. This is the second piece of what we do. What are your options if you're targeted for hate? Or if you are working with a CBO, a community-based organization, and working with people targeted for hate, how do you help connect people with resources? Those resources can look many different ways. I'm going to share a little information about what it looks like for the first year of our work, but it may include connecting with civil legal services. So again, perhaps someone's being targeted for acts of discrimination in addition to hate. It may include access to mental health resources. One of the things that you'll see in our data is that after our first year, we've connected people with over 100 different types of services. So not over 100 different services, but different kinds of services. So really recognizing that every individual, every community is going to require different resources and support. I also wanted to share information about, we are hoping to drive better reporting. So one of the things, and I think our colleagues at the AG's office have clearly talked about the challenges in terms of effective reporting that they see from a hate crimes perspective. By accepting all reports of hate, we are, to be clear, we are very separate in terms of our data. Our data is not law enforcement data. We do not investigate if someone comes to us. We connect them with resources and help them identify next steps. That said, we are making sure that people know how to access all of their different options. And we know that by helping connect people with resources, even if it's not a crime, we are helping to build sufficient trust so that if they are targeted for a crime or someone in their community is, they may feel more apt to report either to us or to law enforcement. We also, to ensure that we're providing these services in a way that is effective, we have ongoing training on cultural competence, and we are always expanding our network. So our network right now includes community-based organizations across the state. It includes the 180 grantees within the California Department of Social Services. So we are constantly trying to expand that network to make sure that we really can connect people with the resources that they need. So if people reach out to us, they can get trauma-informed services in over 200 languages. We have an online portal, again, ca-hate.org. That forum online is in 15 languages. If people call, we can help in over 200 languages. And again, we have a network of trauma-informed agents and care coordinators. The care coordination piece is important as well. This is not simply a referral line. If someone calls and would like to identify their options and wants support in connecting with them, we will stay with them to ensure that they actually connect. So we've had cases where we're able to connect people pretty quickly. They get what they need, whether they were looking for mental health services in a particular language or in a particular area. Others, because of the nature of trauma, may not know everything that they need initially, and so we will work with them and stay with them until we can connect them with the resources that they're looking for. For some reason, I'm not able to. I'm trying. Oh, it was not letting me connect to the next slide. But I can speak through the slides if that works better. Maybe. I'm going to go ahead and just speak through the slides, or I could potentially share my screen if that works better. I'll defer to my colleagues in the AG's office. But our intake process, just to give you a quick sense of what it looks like, we let people sort of call, we identify what their next steps are, including civil or criminal legal actions. So again, Sometimes people call and they are considering going to law enforcement and just need additional information about how to do that, and we'll provide that. Other folks don't feel safe doing it, and so we let them know what their options are. Again, demonstrating that government can be responsive. Whenever possible, we connect them with culturally competent resources and support, and we always provide care coordination services, again, to ensure that connection. One of the things we take seriously is accountability for our actions and for our services and support. So we have contracts with community-based organizations across the state, then they look at our work, let us know what we're getting right and what we're getting wrong. We also provide, we do regular community feedback sessions. We have multilingual outreach and education campaigns. So you will see a lot of our resources. And let's see, I'm going to jump back in and see if this works again. It looks like it may still be frozen on that slide, which is okay. So I'll just keep speaking. But we also have a network development. So we are always consulting. Here we go. Yeah, we can leave it there and I'll jump to that. And again, we have a separate 8338 number. So if you look at the way people can reach out to us, they can go to 8338 No Hate. We are connecting with a really great, I think if you can go back a little, that'd be great, but looks like may have gone to the appendix here. Anyway, you can connect to us by going to 8338 No Hate, which is a separate line. And part of why we did that was to make sure that you had no wait, that we had a very short wait time. This is perfect right here. With respect to the wait time, it can be no longer than 3 minutes if people reach out and call. So looking at here, this is after 1 year, we wanted to give you a quick summary of where we were and what we're trying to do next. So an initial summary after 1 year. And again, our data is separate from the AG's data. We do not have data that comes directly from law enforcement. Our data is coming in terms of the experience of Californians as reported to us. And our goal is to simply supplement and certainly not to, we're completely separate. So our goal is to supplement that data, but to help us understand where are we reaching effectively in terms of communities targeted for hate and where do we need to do more work. So again, we connected people to more than 100 different forms of support. We received over 1,000 reports of hate. We actually had over 2,000 contacts, meaning about half of those were people who were not reporting a form of discrimination, but were looking for support. And we highlight that just because when people reach out to us, we do try to connect them with what they need. We recognize that, as a state, we need to make sure we're connecting people with the resources that they need. 4 out of 6 people who did report an act of hate agreed to follow-up care coordination services, and we were able to reach, we heard from over 80% of California's counties. Thank you. And so the next, just in terms of an initial data summary, and what I want to flag right now is that we will have a more detailed report coming soon that will get down to more disaggregated data where you'll be able to see more details. But the most common reasons cited for reports, and again, these are reports coming from individuals or communities, discriminatory treatment at 18%, verbal harassment or derogatory names or slurs. The most common locations were residential, workplace, or public facilities. So again, this is separate data from what you heard before. This is the data we're receiving here at the Civil Rights Department. And the way we use that data is to both make sure we're connecting people with the resources that they need to be connected with, and it also helps us to inform our colleagues across the state who are working to provide support for people who may be targeted for discrimination. And here, just we went through, and the reports that we got, we further validated the bias motivation, meaning we confirmed, we looked at every individual report of hate and made sure that there was an additional indicia that this was indeed the bias motivation that they were reporting. Race and ethnicity were far and away the greatest number, followed by gender identity and sexual orientation. And anti-Black hate, again, is the number one form of hate that was reported with respect to race. And this is reflected, I think we see this in the AG's data as well. I'm going to turn next in terms of what are we doing with this information that we've learned to my colleague Chantel.
Thank you, Becky. So we've learned many lessons in our first year of California versus hate, and we know we still have much more to do. We have a 1-year report forthcoming, and we're working to improve the online reporting experience and expanding access to data. We've also partnered with UC Berkeley's Possibility Lab to support increased data collection and analysis. We're also re-reviewing our intake forms, possibly revising them to make them shorter, as well as improving other aspects of the user experience. We like to make the reporting process as easy as possible. And we also want to enable the sharing of more data more quickly. And we're excited about the development of a data dashboard. In efforts to expand our reach to communities who are and who are not reporting, we're launching a billboard campaign to support increased awareness across half a dozen cities. And we're currently in the middle of our 2024 Pride Tour, where we have a fabulous California versus Hate float, and we are tabling at each event. We make regular updates to our outreach materials, including digital assets developed in coordination with tribal partners. We have community-specific engagement through a federal grant to ensure communities most targeted for hate have access to resources. Because of this federal grant, we were able to fund the position of a CBO manager and a subgrant with California Black Media. This year, Unite Against Hate will start September 21st through September 27th and is a response to the rise in hate and seeks to empower local residents to take action in their local communities. And this is in collaboration with Not in Our Town, LA versus Hate, and Stop the Hate. And the many toolkits for the cities and organizations to join Unite Against Hate Week can be found at www.uniteagainsthateweek.org/toolkits. And these are some of the examples of our various assets and content, which can be found in 24 languages for California versus Hate campaign featured on our hub at cavshate.org. You will find all of our social graphics, posters, and flyers and customizable content on this partner hub. And on the partner hub, you will also find a fictional case study example created to help people better understand a little bit more about what reporting with California versus Hate may look like. And now I'll pass it back to my colleague, Becky.
I think we are finished. So thank you. And we welcome any further questions afterwards, and I'll turn it back to Kat.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful information and did answer some of the questions that came in. So thank you all for participating in our community briefing today. Our Office of Community Awareness, Response, and Engagement strives to develop these intentional spaces at the DOJ to share out about more regularly about our programs, resources. So we appreciate that you took your time to engage with us. We also encourage you to use this report and the data as a resource as you're doing your work in the community. We apologize that we're not able to get to the question and answer as we are at time. However, I hope that through the presentations, it has served to answer some of your questions. As a reminder, the presentations are available at our CARE webpage, oag.ca.gov/care. But before you go, we also wanted to share about one of our upcoming virtual presentations. You heard a little bit about the Racial Justice Bureau earlier, but we'll be doing a deeper dive during our Demystifying the DOJ webinar happening on September 18th at 10 a.m. Registration will be up soon, so please check our website for updates. Thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to keeping in touch. Have a great day.